Welcome everyone. My name is Xander. I use he, him pronouns, and I am joining you from the lands of the Cubby Cubby people. I have pale skin, have brown hair, and I'm wearing a maroon polo shirt. I have a physical disability called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I'm proud to be your guide for this webinar. I will be helping to facilitate this important discussion on early inclusion in early childhood. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that even though we are meeting virtually, I'm meeting from the lands of the Cubby Cubby people. We would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we work, live, and play. We pay deep respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be, that there is no justice without First Nations justice. Okay, so let's look at today's agenda. Today, we're going to be talking about inclusion, including stories from us, and then we'll be talking about having a vision for the future. We'll be covering a range of topics across inclusion, language, and disability. This will go on for about 40 minutes. After this, we will have a 5-minute break. We will then come back together, talk about practical ways to start, and then have some final reflections. We are all here today as CYDA believes that hearing from young people like myself about our experiences helps families, caregivers, and communities to have high expectations and aspirations for all children. We ask today that we are all respectful of one another and we are inclusive. Sometimes in talking about our experiences, we might get a question or cover a topic that is sensitive or includes tough stuff to hear. We will use content notes or we will warn you about what we are going to talk about. For example, if it's about ableism or discrimination. People can choose not to hear this sensitive information. Later on, we might not want to answer a particular question posed and the CYDA team might step in. This isn't necessarily cancelling the question or shutting it down. We just want to make sure everyone's needs are met, yours and ours. Each of our panelists today will introduce themselves. But as an overview, we have young people with a disability, Mac, Ellen, and myself. From the CYDA team, we have Sue, Marinda, and Liz. We also have an educator, Doreen Blith. To be able to see the panelists, please use the speaker view, not gallery view. Most people will be able to change this by selecting speaker view. Please check your screen name is correct and add your pronouns, i.e. she, her, they, them, or he, him, etc. I will now ask each panelist to introduce themselves and share with you the headline of their favorite childhood memory.
Hi everybody, I'm Ellen. I am recently 18 years old. I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wurundjeri people. I really enjoy reading and I have a diagnosis of ADD. One of my favorite childhood memories, I'd have to say, would be going up to SeaWorld and Movie World with my family for a holiday. I had a lot of fun.
Hi, my name is Mac. I am also 18. I go by he, him pronouns. I am calling in from the land of the Bunurong Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. A visual description of me is that I have short, dark, curly hair. I'm currently wearing a yellow beanie. I have olive skin and I am wearing a blue button-up with yellow flowers, but they kind of look like polka dots. And I also have a feeding tube on my face. One of my favorite childhood memories would have to be our yearly trips up to Fraser Island.
Hello again. As you may know, my name is Xander, and my favorite memory is centered around the ocean, where I always felt at ease and calm with my family.
Thanks, Xander, Mac and Ellen. And I'll call upon Doreen Blythe now to introduce herself as well, please.
Hi, I'm Doreen Bly. I'm an educator from the Noongar Whadjuk lands in the Swan River region in Perth, Western Australia. I'm an older woman, I'm 60, I have pure white hair, I have rather thick glasses and a slightly difficult to understand speech accent from a lisp uncured. With me today is Debbie, an educator specialist in inclusion support in Western Australia. We're so excited to be here with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Debbie. Sue speaking. So my name is Sue Tape. I work for CYDA, along with some others that will introduce themselves. I'm very excited to have you all here. So my pronouns are she, her. I'm calling in from the lands of the Yuggera and the Turrbal people. And I too am an older woman with dark curly hair, and I wear black glasses and very pale skin. And we are really excited to have everyone as part of this session today. So I'll hand over to Miranda to introduce herself.
Thanks, Sue. Miranda speaking. I also work for CYDA, and I'm joining this seminar today to help with some of the tech support. So if you're having any trouble, please feel free to privately message me, and then we can try to fix it together. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm calling from Wurundjeri country. A little bit about me. I've got quite dark brown hair, which is tied back, and I'm wearing a turtleneck jumper because it's quite chilly here in Melbourne today. And then my background is very, very white. My favorite childhood memory, I have two older brothers, pretty similar age to me, and then some cousins, similar age also. And every Easter we'd all go camping together and just run amok and, ride our bikes until, the sun went down. And I just, cherish those memories. Thanks, Sue. And I'll pass back to Xander, I believe.
Okay, so just some housekeeping before we begin. This webinar will have Auslan interpreting, which you'll be able to see on the screen along with the speaker. This session will have live captions, and they will be visible at the bottom of your screen. But if for some reason you cannot see them, there should be a CC button at the bottom of your screen to access captions. Please use the chat to ask your questions. The session will also be recorded to share with others. If you do not wish to have your face recorded, please ensure your camera is off. If you're having any technical issues, please private message our webinar support person, Miranda, in the chat.
All yours, Mac.
We are now going to move into part 1. For this webinar and all other stories within these series, we'll be sharing stories from young people. We think of our stories as we would like you to think of our stories as planting a seed. We want to give you prompts, ideas, or thought starters. We want to provoke thoughts, ideas, and actions that focus on including all children from an early age. We'll give you a general direction of inclusion, but you will take these ideas where you want and what suits your child and your family. Sometimes these prompts will be in video form or a speaker in the webinar like today. Sometimes it might also be an image or an object. So now I would like to call on Ellen to share their story.
Thank you. I realised I'd forgotten to give a visual description of myself in my introduction. I have pale skin, short purple hair, and I'm wearing a tan dress with mushrooms on it. So sorry about that. And I'm going to get right into my first prepared story. So when I was around 3, my dad and I would go to the park a lot, especially around Bluedale Lake near Mount Evelyn. Our dog, Kinner, used to really like swimming. So we'd throw a stick or a ball out into the lake and she would swim after it. Anyway, one day, me and my dad are throwing the sticks. My dad throws one, it goes really far. Far enough that it got almost halfway across the lake. Then he says to me, Ellen, you throw it next time. I give it my absolute all. Olympic shot put throwers do not take throwing anything as seriously as I took throwing that stick. It soars through the air and lands about half a meter away. And I remember it was really funny because the dog just looked at the stick and then just looked at me. You could almost hear her thinking, you're joking, right? And I really have a lot of joy from that memory. It's one of my favorite memories of that dog. And it was an activity I really, really loved as a child and something I really treasured being able to do with my dad.
Thank you, Ellen. We're now going to move on to a short activity. We would like you to think about what things did you like to do when you were a child. It is important to keep a record of this as we'll be coming back to these things later. So you can individually write down, draw, imagine, whatever format works best for you, 2 things that you enjoyed to do as a young child. There are some thought starters on the slide, but please take a few moments now to capture your thoughts.
Sue speaking. Hopefully, in the email that you got during the registration process, you will have been sent to a link to a Google Doc, which has a worksheet for this session. And this is the way that we'll be running most of these sessions. So even though Mac and the slide explains the activity, if you'd like to use that worksheet, so it's got a picture of some prompters and you're thinking about what other things that you liked to do as a child. And I didn't include mine in my introduction deliberately. So just as another thought starter, I enjoyed water, any shape or form, be it pool, be it sea, be it river or lake. Water is my favorite thing. So we'll just give you one more minute to think about your favorite things as a child. And Miranda's helpfully included a link to that handout in the Google chat because there'll be a second activity later. Okay, so we'll come back to your list of favorite things later when we talk about creating a vision for your child. Miranda, if I get you to go to the next slide. So we want to now start talking about inclusion. So we're talking about looking at now as inclusion as the goal. And there are 6 things that all children need to thrive. And inclusion is at the core of those 6. So you'll see on the slide, there are a number of cogs about things that fit together. And this is taken from the It Takes Six communication strategy that was developed by Every Child and Aracy, A-R-A-C-Y. And you can see that there are 6 cogs on there, and it is an image of a cog because all these 6 things work together. So the first one is healthy, in that every child should live a healthy life, physically, emotionally, and mentally. The second cog, the orange cog, is learning. Every child deserves access to high quality learning from the early years on. Next is housing. Every child should have the basics of living, including a stable, secure home with a decent family income. The fourth cog, which is purple, is positive identity. Every child from every culture and background should be confident and respected. The fifth cog, the blue cog on the screen, valued. Every child deserves to be valued, loved, and safe, living free from abuse and neglect. And the sixth and final cog on the screen is the green one, which is participation. Every child should be able to have a say and be connected into family and community life. We hope that you see these 6 things as fundamentals, but also as a reminder that children with disability or development delays or differences of any kind have the human right to have all 6 of those things like all children. So if I could get you to move on, now we're going to talk about what the ideal future is. So CYDA's vision is that children and young people with disability are valued and living empowered lives with equality of opportunity, so that children and young people with disability are always safe, fully included, respected, and valued. And also that children and young people with disability can fulfill their education, work, housing, and independent potential and aspirations. We also want people to enjoy strong connections, friendships, and evolving networks as they grow. We also want families and communities that celebrate children and young people with disability, their talents and their strengths, and have high expectations for the future. So we're going to move to the next slide, and I will jump back to Xander, please. Sorry, Xander, you're on silent.
I'm not going to talk about that. So now we're going to move on to part 2, shaping a vision for your children and the families. I would like to call on Ellen now to share their next story.
All right, thank you. So this next story, it's based on I mentioned in my initial introduction, one of my favorite childhood memories. It centers around our trip to Dreamworld. Back from when I was younger, my family went up to Queensland. So one day during this trip, my mum is watching my baby sister in the pram. And in doing this, she takes her eyes off me for a moment. So I'm looking around and I look across the path and I see that there is a keeper and they had one of the tigers out with them on a leash, which I just thought was the coolest thing I've ever seen. So like any unsupervised 3-year-old, I do the only logical thing. I walk over and ask to pat the tiger. And they say yes. And to this day, it is one of the coolest things I've ever done. And so that is a really, really amazing memory. And I'm also, every time I bring it up, I feel like I should apologize to my mother for the stress I caused her that day. Where's Ellen? Oh, she's with the tiger. She's with the tiger. But yeah, so that was a lot of fun. It was super cool. And it's a great story that I love telling even now.
Thanks, Ellen. In 2020, CYDA held the inaugural National Youth Disability Summit, and across 5 days, over 250 young people shared their ideas and insights. There were many ideas, but we wanted to tell you about a couple that are important on the topic of inclusion in early childhood. They are disability pride. Young people express disability pride and a sense of community with other people with a disability. Some young people also share that being actively involved in the disability community can lead to feelings of disability pride. Role models. The presence of role models within the disabled community enables young people to feel more included in the community. Young people value how role models present new options and help pave the way for different life path styles. Intersectionality. Young people share a commitment to elevating the voices of more marginalized members within the disability community who don't have a voice. This includes young people with a disability who face increased structural and systemic barriers, such as young First Nations people and young people, such as myself, in the LGBTQIA+ community. The importance of using inclusive language and terminology has been recognized by the disability community for decades. CYDA uses person-first language, as in children and young people with a disability. But many people with a disability choose to use identity-first language, such as I am autistic or I am disabled. As noted throughout the summit, there is a shared belief among young people that people in power should be proactive in asking children and young people how they identify, and to just ask if you're unsure. Personally, I prefer first-person language and will always refer to myself as Xander, a 15-year-old boy with a disability. Language is very personal. Please respect the language that people use to describe themselves, even if it's not the choice you would make for yourself or your child. I would like to encourage you to think about how you describe your child. Introducing your child with a list of diagnoses, labels, or disability types means that many people may only see or think only of their disability. You might hear this called a deficit approach. For example, you may hear someone say, I'd like to introduce you to Sue. She can't drive a manual car, must have glasses for close work, and won't eat celery or Brussels sprouts. This introduction doesn't help you to understand what she can do and what she enjoys and the skills she is working on. We are going to move on to the next activity. Using your favorite childhood things you wrote down before, what is the vision for your child? Write down, draw, or imagine the vision for the next few years. What do you want them to experience as a young child? What do you want to share with them? There are some thought starters on the slide, but please take a few moments now to capture your thoughts. Having a vision for your child and your family might feel clumsy or artificial at first, but being clear about what you want for your child and the things to aim for is bold and brave. If you are clear, your child is not constrained by what other people think or decide. You might not know everything about your child and their future right now, and that's okay. It's the same for every young child. Don't limit the vision, be brave and be bold.
Xander and I won't sing to you for thinking music. So we are deliberately being quiet to give you a chance to think about your vision. So just one more minute to think about what you want children to experience as a young child, what you want to share with them, and what people or places you want them to be part of.
Margaret, yes, there will be a recording after this. Don't worry about leaving because we will have it recorded. You too, Margaret.
Okay, so we'll finish up on that activity now. I'd like you to hold on to your notes from both what you remember from your childhood and what you wrote down as what you want as the vision for your child. Over the course of the webinars that CYDA are running, there are different topics, and we'll come back to these ideas. So we would hope that you would join us for future webinars, but also we will come back to these ideas. So we would like to pause now to take some questions. So Mac's going to join me again, just in case I need some help with any questions. And we haven't had any questions so far in the chat. Now, if you'd like to ask some questions of any of our speakers or of CYDA about what we've covered so far, more than welcome. And after this Q&A session, we'll take a break before we move on to the next part of the webinar. Doreen or Debbie, did you have any questions for the young people?
Hi, I'm Doreen. I'm sitting here with Debbie. Not a question, but a comment about how we listen and how we learn about what each other needs, and how much we hope this series is enjoyed by everyone who's active in it. I think that we're going to learn a lot more from you than you are from us. And we're going to have some questions for you as we go along.
Thanks, Doreen. I think, Mac, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
As an 18-year-old, did your family ever talk about their vision for your childhood, or what they looked forward to for you as a child?
Not like directly, like we sat down and had the conversation, but I think through conversations over the years, it's definitely come up. I had a very rough high school experience, and so often Mom and I would talk about how that's not what she had envisioned for my future. But we also talk about how it, as a little child, I would get strangers coming up to me and telling me that I am going to change the world, and that they just had to tell me because they just thought it was really important. It was kind of a very bizarre thing, because it didn't really happen to anyone else. It was just something that happened to me on a very often thing. And then it's funny that now I do public speaking and I work on creating change. And so I think it's as well as funny when we talk about visions and that like so many other people recognize at a tiny little child that they never met, that they knew that this was going to be something I was doing in the future. And that was my vision. But I think at the end of the day, the vision my parents really had was that I was happy and safe and as healthy as I can be, and that I was living the best life that I possibly could. And as that's really like, we see it as like, that's just the goal in life, to be able to have the best happy life that you are capable of having.
And one last question for you, Mac, before I turn the spotlight on Xander and Helen. Can I ask you, what are the things that make you happy?
What makes me happy? I think hanging out with friends, but not only that, hanging out with friends who make you feel safe and comfortable and that you can be yourself is a very important part of my life now. I also love reading. I am dyslexic, so I always struggle to read, but recently I found some little hacks to make reading a little bit more accessible to me, so I've been really enjoying that. I love being in nature. I used to do hiking, I still camp, I do canoeing, kayaking, whitewater rafting, rock climbing, abseiling, caving, anything through my scouts, which is something I also love. I also love arts and craft. I bullet journal. Yeah.
Thank you, Mac. Xander, sorry, I'm going to turn the spotlight on you now and ask you, as a slightly younger person, so younger than Mac and Ellen, is vision something that you've talked about with your family or pondered yourself?
I think it's come up, like, again, not like specifically like we had to like sit down and talk about it, but I think it's more mum has always told me that I might have a disability, but I can still do the things that I want to do and live my life to its fullest. Sometimes there might have to be some changes for that, but that's for other people to adjust to and not me. Yeah, it's kind of a vision I've always had for the future, is obviously being able to move out on my own and have a job and being able to supply for myself. It was kind of unexpected. Well, I think it was expected, because I remember Mum talking about how ages back when I was younger with my older sibling, when Dad was still alive, she had a conversation with him, saying that, is it just me or are those two acting really masculine? Turns out today, my older sibling's non-binary and I'm trans, so it's kind of like a little bit of spice in that vision, but yeah.
And Xander, before I turn to Ellen, what are the things that you really enjoy in your life right now?
Well, right now I really enjoy coding. I'm just a very big nerd. I like being able to hang out with my friends. You know, as I've gotten older, with Ehlers-Danlos, it's kind of more, you have to learn to listen to your body and learn what you can and can't do individually. But obviously, as I've gotten older, I've gotten more in tune with my body, and I've been able to go out places with people. I took a really big step last year, and for someone's birthday, we did gel blasting. Was absolutely wiped out, but it was really fun. So it's kind of being able to make decisions like that, which really I enjoy doing, because it was obviously with my friends and it was something I've wanted to do for a while. So yeah.
Thank you, Xander. And Ellen, first question is about vision and whether, as a family or you personally, have put much thought into your vision of your life.
I personally have. I'm quite confident with what I want. I would like to have more independence. Similar to Xander, I'd like to live independently. I'd like to be able to take care of myself. I'd like to get better at driving, that sort of thing. And I think my family's vision for me has also been quite similar. I know that my parents have always been very fierce advocates for me being able to do anything I put my mind to, pretty much. And I've made a lot of progress, especially with their help towards those goals. Yeah, I'm very thankful for that.
Fantastic. And focusing on the now, what are your favourite things that are part of your life at the moment?
Oh, that's a very good question. I'm currently doing VCE, and I'm also working. I'm doing VCE part-time, and the other part of my time I'm working with the I Can Network as a mentor to other people on the disability spectrum, and I'm very passionate about that. I really love it. I enjoy art and reading, and I really love hanging out with my cat. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take a break now. We're going to take a 5-minute break. So it's 10:42 Australian Eastern Standard Time. We might come back at 10:50. So I've added a couple of minutes there. So 10:50 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So please take the opportunity to turn your audio off, turn your camera off, and we'll be back and we'll post in a reminder as well. So take care, please.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Now let's explore where to start looking at communication, people and places, and sharing of stories. I would like to call on Mac now to share a story.
So when I was little, my mum would do courses for her work, kind of like reviewed education that you have to do every year up in Fraser Island. And originally she'd go by herself, but one year, I think something happened at a school fair and I couldn't find my mum and I got a bit lost. And ever since then, I was like, no, Mum, you're not allowed to go. I have to come with you. So I went up with her for the first year. And it then became an annual yearly holiday that we would do as a whole family. So because obviously it was for a course, we got to stay in this quite fancy hotel resort place thing that would have buffet lunch for all of the osteopaths that were there learning the course. And little me would sneak in and join Mum every lunchtime, and I would hang out with all of the adults and have conversations with them. But a part of it that I really loved was, based on where we were staying in the hotel, Dad could watch me make my way by myself to where the buffet was located. So every day at around lunchtime, I would get on my scooter and push myself all the way down to the buffet. And I felt so much like an adult because I was allowed to do this by myself. And I was very, very proud of it. I thought I was a grown-up and having lunch with grown-ups too. And it was definitely a highlight. We all love a good buffet in my family. Like if it's a hotel, it only gets a 5-star rating if it has a buffet. We don't care about how fancy it is. It has to have the buffet. And that became a daily occurrence and then a yearly occurrence. And it was one of my favorite parts about going to Fraser Island that I always cherish and remember, getting to have those lunchtime sessions with my mum and getting to make my way there and back all by myself.
Thank you, Mac. I have another story of mine to share with you as well. This story comes from an experience that I had in year 3 at my primary school. I remember feeling so valued and wanted when my teacher sat down with me and asked what activities I would like to see the school hold during break times. I remember feeling like I mattered. I don't think taking the time to act on inclusion can be underestimated. The value in showing a disabled child what inclusion looks like is enormous. We've talked about lots of possibly challenging, new, or different ideas today. Inclusion, identity, pride, memories, and visions for the future. So now we want to break things down into small bite-sized, doable chunks. Where can you start with inclusion? The goal is to make sure your child is warmly welcomed, supported to be a part of things that all children enjoy as young children. Inclusion is not something that you do as part of your day or schedule a particular time each day. Being included in everyday ordinary activities from as early as possible with any necessary supports will help overcome any big barriers down the track. So let's look at what that looks like. Start with small bite-sized activities, going to the local shops, heading to the park, coffee at a place you know. Look at something you can all do together to support each other. Consider if it's age appropriate. Match activities with your child's age and interests. Recognize the importance of including other children. There is value in bringing other kids together to copy, observe, and share things with. Look at things that can be repeated and are easily replicated. If you think about the activity, what went well, and how can you do that again? How can you repeat the good stuff that happened? We have looked at what, so now let's consider where. Think about your local community. Places you know you can feel welcomed and good places to venture out to enjoy activities with a range of people. But also consider trialing new things and new places. This might give you the chance to trial things without people you know watching. When considering the where, remember this also means consideration of ensuring there are places you can walk away from and ensure you have safe places. Trying things in different places can build up confidence to make bigger, bolder steps in your local community. New places are also great for practicing how to introduce your child and family and ask for support or other things for inclusion. So we have spoken about the what and where. Let's consider who is important to the practical steps around inclusion. Parenting or raising a child is a marathon. My mum and other adults in my life tell me it's a long, exciting journey full of ups and downs. That is the same for raising all children. The common feedback from talking with other teens and their parents is that it's always helpful to have a warm bunch of supporters along the way. Different adults have different experiences of disabilities and also attitudes. Sometimes inclusion will feel like a fight. Asking for acceptance and diversity to be respected will feel hard. You want people by your side who want to support you and your child. Try to avoid the negative people in your life when you need strength and solutions. You will want things from different people. Some friends may be great when you need to vent, and then some might be good for troubleshooting. Look at those around you and build a team around different strengths. Sometimes you just need that support to cheer you on and hold your hand, whilst other times you need to seek out that ally to step you through what feels like a minefield.
Thanks, Xander. We might stay on that slide, but also open it up to any questions. So I'll just move some of my friends in with me. Doreen.
Thank you. It's Doreen again, the educator from Perth. What you've had to say is incredibly powerful. I work with mums and dads who have young children who want to come to early childhood and into outside school hours care or after school care as well. The where to start is powerful. How does it make you feel being involved in the detail of your own life?
I think it feels quite good. Primary school wasn't perfect. They didn't always ask me, which they probably should have done a bit better, but nowadays because obviously it's my body and my disability and my experiences. I get to have input in what I do instead of someone who may not even know my disability or understand my disability make those decisions for me. And it's really quite empowering to have that responsibility, because you yourself may not know all the answers, but you can express what you want out of something instead of, again, someone having to do it for you.
It's interesting to hear you talk about responsibility. I think the sharing of responsibility with the person most at the heart of all of our thinking makes trialing new things easier, makes taking a few risks a little easier. Is that right?
Yeah, having someone in your corner, like your guardians, or having someone who actually somewhat understands, they don't have to entirely understand, but somewhat understands that it's understanding what you can and can't do takes time for whatever. Sometimes there's a set layout, but everyone is different. Sometimes that set layout isn't relevant. And in my case, it isn't always relevant. So being able to have a parent that can express certain things for me when I don't have the words, but when I do have the words, being able to speak up for myself, that's a really nice feeling. So instead of having a support system that's like, I'm going to put words in your mouth, they ask me personally and they interpret that for me. Because obviously you don't always know the words for how to explain something to people.
Are you more likely to take risks or try something new when people spend time?
I mean, probably yes. Again, it's with my disability specifically, it's more just as I get older, I know what I can and can't do. But when I have people in my corner who are supportive and don't see just the disability, they see the person, I'm more willing to take risks, because as a person with Ehlers-Danlos, pretty much everything I do is a risk, and I subconsciously acknowledge that all the time. But if I have a lot of people in my corner and I'm like, you know what? The risk outweighs the enjoyment that I'm going to get out of this. I'm going to give it a crack. That's the kind of thing that I would risk something that if I could do something with my friends and I was going to get some real good enjoyment out of it, I would do, yeah.
I feel that I've got dozens more questions for you because you are fascinating, but I'm going to give someone else a go to have some talking time and listening time with you. But as somebody with, I'm dyslexic, and I didn't talk about in my childhood, but I don't read the way that other people read. And I find reading incredibly difficult. And I think that the power of listening has become incredibly important to me, and the power of hearing has become important to me. And I've learned today about the power of hearing all over again. And from what you have said, I will look at the next young child who comes to talk to me about their plans very, very differently. So thank you for how powerful your answers were.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen. Mac, I suppose are there any experiences that you remember as a young child, also dyslexic, that because we're talking about a range of young people on the call today with lots of different experiences and lots of things going on in your life, but specifically, do you remember anything around reading as a young child and what helped to move things on?
I despised reading. I don't think there is a word that exists to summarize my hatred for it when I was a little child. My mom tried like all the options to try to help me to read. But I think for me at that time, it was less about trying to force me to do something that my brain wasn't able to do, but find ways to adapt. So I was allowed to listen to audiobooks. I read picture books because picture books still have words and they are still a valid way to read, even if my other kids in my year level are reading like 300-page chapter fancy books. And so for me, what helped was, I guess, not trying to force me to read in the way that everyone else did, but find the ways that work. So as I was responding to Natasha's question, when I read, I don't read words, I read height and width of shapes instead of words. And it has been a fun little trick that has helped me read. And so I read, but I don't read in the same way you read, and that is completely valid. So, and I think that that's a great advice really for when it comes to making things work for all kids with disabilities. It's about finding ways to adapt and work with the way that their brain or their body functions instead of trying to force them to do it in the same way that the other kids are doing it, because our way is different, but it is just as valid, and sometimes it's just as efficient, but it's just a bit different.
Thank you, Mac. And Ellen, I suppose from your experience, thinking about what Doreen has been asking and what Xander and Mac have said, did you have either a different perspective or anything else that you would like to add?
I think that sorry, I'm trying to be blanking. I think that it's really important that everyone can learn in their own ways and have those respected. For example, with the different methods of reading or how long it will take people to reach those milestones. But I think it is very, very important that everyone is accommodated at their own pace and in their own way. I know I had a lot of trouble learning to read as a young child, but with enough support, being able to do it the best way for me to learn, I was able to eventually learn, and I'm actually now doing literature in GCE. So I think that even if you do struggle with something, you might not struggle with it forever, and it's very important to have that mindset of the growth mindset of I'm having trouble with this now, but there's still a possibility for improvement.
Thank you, Ellen. I'm going to change the topic slightly. One of the things we haven't really touched on this morning is the role of peers. So the role of friends or people in your young people like yourselves, and what you remember of childhood. So I'll start with you, Xander. What role, if any, did your same age peers or your friends play in your early childhood and your experiences as well?
Yeah, it's obviously in early childhood, you have the typical young child that's like, oh, you're like me, we're going to be friends now. They kind of younger children have the perception of they don't see a disability, they just see a cool person with a cool personality, we should be friends. So it was kind of nice in the early years because of my personality and very early signs of anxiety. I was kind of like the weird, awkward kid because of the fact that I had a disability, because I didn't know how to approach people without them being judgy, that, oh, you're a bit weird, oh, why can't you do this? But in the early childhood years, in terms of peers, it wasn't about that. It was, oh, hey, you like this, I like this too. It was the whole, you didn't have to see that. It was more, yeah, just younger children. A lot of the time, they have that innocence in them that it's just either they don't see that, or it doesn't matter to them, which I think is really good, because it makes making friends in those early years a lot easier than when you're a teenager and people have opinions.
Do you think, Xander, sorry, just one last question for you. Do you think that behind the scenes, were there any adults that needed to be a part of that process? Or do you think that you and your friends worked out those relationships together? Did you have any sort of, I suppose, reflections on the role of adults in your life in those friendships?
I mean, I know a lot of the time, sometimes if one of my friends asked a question, and 9 times out of 10, because I was quite young, I was pretty uncomfortable with explaining it because I didn't know the words for it. It was very new to me because I got diagnosed at like 5, I think. So that was just like the beginning of prep. And so I didn't know the words for it. But it was helpful when, obviously, well, particularly my prep teacher, she was really good. So instead of just making assumptions and shoving stuff down my throat, she'd come up to me and was like, hey, I saw one of your friends ask you a question. Did you want me to explain to them? And I'd tell her in my own words, and then she'd interpret that, which was really nice, instead of using just assumptions, which obviously assumptions can be very harmful in many ways. Because yeah, for a long time when I was younger, I didn't know how to explain my disability, because again, it was very new to me. But when stuff like that did come up, when it was like, oh, but Xander, this is really fun, why don't you want to do it? Oh, Xander, are you being lazy, or is there a reason why you can't do this? Which obviously, child curiosity, they don't mean to be offensive. But it was nice to have someone who was in my corner who could explain that, oh, sometimes Xander can't do those things, but that's okay. You just have to find a way around it.
Thank you, Xander. Ellen, can I move to you next? Do you have any thoughts to share with us about the role of friends or the role of same-age peers when you were little, please?
Kind of similar to Xander, I made one of my first friends who I'm still friends with to this day. We became friends because I saw she had a Tinkerbell backpack, so I decided we were friends. So it was very easy. It was like, Tinkerbell, yes, we're friends now. But I did also find that I could sometimes have trouble explaining why I didn't want to be in certain situations or do certain things. And often, again, I don't want to sound too similar to Xander, but I wouldn't have the words. For example, I have ARFID, which is a eating disorder that makes me quite anxious about food. So, for example, in going to a birthday party, I could be very anxious and people were like, would you like to try this? And that would be a real stress point for me of no. And so that would, cause a bit of confusion for my friends of why aren't you eating anything? Which, again, they weren't trying to be rude or, pick at anything. They were just confused because they're kids. And I was a bit confused too. But I also found that it gave me a sense of belonging and community for days when I was having a bad day, especially as I got slightly older. A bit of the angst was kicking in. It was always nice to have friends from childhood to be able to talk to about how everything was the worst at any minor inconvenience. So I think that especially the friends who've known me for a really long time, so I can just be able to be very blunt with them, whereas with people I've met in my teenage years, it can be a bit more awkward. Not with my close friends, but just your childhood friends are always going to have your back, especially the really good ones. And so those relationships were really important to me at the time, and I'm still really thankful to them to this day.
Thank you, Ellen. Mac, I'm going to throw you a curly question that we've had from the audience. And I suppose it reflects on this last conversation and the role of adults. So the question was around what might need to change for the development or the professional development of those early childhood educators. So these are preschool or kindy teachers or childcare or daycare. So depending on what term you prefer to use, we obviously use early childhood education and care at CYDA. But what do you think could or should, and I'm giving you a blank sheet of paper with a bucket full of money, so we're going big picture here. What, as a young person, and you've obviously had quite a lot of experience in advocating for yourself and others, but what do you think those early childhood educators need to hear from young people like yourselves, and how they can get themselves across things like inclusion of young children with disability? Are there any things that come to mind?
Yeah, there's a couple. I think the first one is it's okay to ask questions. Obviously, in the setting of early childhood, it may not always be suited to ask the young child. They may not always know the answer. But I think if they are capable, I think we underestimate what young kids are able to bring on the table. And I think especially with disabled kids, we know our bodies, we know what works best for us. So I think it is important to listen to us and also value our voices, and that age should not be a deterrent to that. Regardless of our age, we are able to share and to listen. We might just need support in doing so, which is completely okay. And I think don't make assumptions is a huge one as well. And I also think just knowing that we are also kids. I know me and quite a few of my other friends who also grew up disabled were kind of thrown into adult world quite early, whether that be just through so many appointments or whether that through having to advocate for ourselves for access. So I think just remembering that we're kids and that we should be kids too. But I also think something that you can do that's quite feasible is reflect on how you view disability as well, and learn from the voices of disabled adults or people who share their stories. If you like reading, there's some great books by disabled authors who talk about like disability rights, what it's like being disabled, inclusion, access. There's resources that are everywhere. I know that currently our education system in regards to like university, as in like teaching you for your courses, are not always the best at providing accurate information. So I guess trying to search that out for yourselves, but when doing so, to prioritize listening to our voices first, as this is our lives, this is our lived experience. And I think as well as get comfortable having conversations as well. I think we sometimes don't like to have conversations with little kids because these are big conversations and we don't know how to do it. And it's a bit awkward and uncomfortable, but little kids are great. When they ask me while I'm in a wheelchair, I just say, oh yeah, my legs don't work quite well, so I use my chair and it's super fast. And they're like, that's so cool. You can have age-appropriate conversations around disability. And I think we need to start normalize having those conversations at a younger age, so kids who aren't disabled don't grow up uncomfortable. I had a lot of peers when I was a kid, and even now, be very uncomfortable around me because they were never taught how to be around me. So they grew up uncomfortable, not too sure how to engage. But if we kind of break that at that young age and start to normalize conversations around disability, it will allow us to create a much more inclusive environment for everyone.
Can I ask a question following on from that? And I just popped into the chat that I'm very close to offering you a job, except that I understand it to be a hell of a commute for you. So, so for you, you're saying for educators, it's around relationship and language. Is that what I'm hearing? Taking
Yeah.
time and making language with you about what needs to be said, rather than making a decision about what needs to be said before the conversation actually occurs. We have a curse in early childhood. We have hundreds of pages of rules and all that sort of stuff. And I think we tend towards leaning into that rather than leaning into language and relationships and conversations. And so in early childhood, I advise that we focus on language and conversation and relationships first and work the other stuff out later. But am I hearing to you that language and conversations is the most important thing?
I think at that age range, it really is. But I do also think when having conversations that it is really important to empower that young child in those conversations as well. So that I've had teachers who think they're doing a really great job and have conversations about my disability with the whole class, but they didn't talk to me beforehand, and it ends up being a complete mess. And so I think we need to have these conversations and build on this language and relationships, but with the child, but I guess letting the child lead the way and decide what that looks like, how that works, and especially for disabled children whose autonomy is not always given to us, that if we're empowering them at such a young age to have that control over their lives, it's going to empower them for the rest of their lives.
Thank you.
Ellen, can I get you to reflect on what Mac has said, and are there any extra things that you would add, that you would ask of people working in that early childhood space, please?
I do think it is really important whenever you're going to have a conversation about disabilities with people in our lives, which they are important conversation to have, but definitely do talk to us first before, you know, you start talking about, say, I once had a situation where a teacher was talking about autism in front of the class and just went, for example, Alan's autistic, and I'm saying like, I didn't agree to this. And while I didn't have a problem with it, I definitely should have been consulted first. And I also feel like, especially in early childhood, it's important, even if there are barriers, if a child wants to attempt something, to support them through doing that, regardless of if you think it will work out or not for them. It's important to facilitate the attempt and be supportive. So no one wants to be told that they can't do something without being given the opportunity to at least attempt it. And I feel like being told no flat out, like you'll never be able to do whatever, it's very disheartening to hear, especially at a young age when you're potentially too young to fully understand any limitations you might have. So I do think it's really important to be supportive of, you know, the child's dreams and ambitions, and facilitate maybe the less traditional ways of going about things. To fall back on the reading example, maybe you're not reading the same way as everyone else, but it would still be important that if a child is really passionate about it, to help them read in a different way.
Thank you, Ellen. Just one last question that we've had, Xander. I'm going to throw this one to you. So Claudia was asking about reflective questions. So this is obviously a practice in early childhood education, and Claudia's looking towards what would you recommend educators ask themselves when they're starting to develop inclusive practice? So what things do you want people to think about before they start approaching young children with disability?
Probably first and foremost that 9 times out of 10, a child that they're not going to, even if they are labeled as having a specific disability, that does not mean that every single thing you find on Google is going to match up with them. Every single person with a disability is different. So the initial asking for their input, sure, as a child, they may not initially 100% know. They may have scattered ideas of what specifically they want, but understanding their input is very validating for someone with a disability. It's instead of being ignored, because for a lot of my primary school years, they only took the input of my mum, and obviously she was still new to all of this, which again, a child doesn't know everything, but they know their body more than an outside person does. They know what causes them pain or what their body feels like they shouldn't do. And again, some disabilities can range from day to day. With Ehlers-Danlos, I could be very tired on one day and the next just have a load of energy out of nowhere because my muscles are starting to be nice to me today. It's kind of like that check-in that before you do a certain activity, even if it's something small like, oh, we're going to go outside and throw a ball around, for example, it's the check-in that, are you okay to do this, or would you like me to change this around before I get the kids excited? Because as soon as you get the other kids excited, they're going to get disappointed if you change it. I've had that experience where, for example, we were sitting in class and we had free time and the teacher was like, oh, do you guys want to go outside and do volleyball or do you want to play Wordle? And she wasn't thinking ahead, which is fine. People do that. And obviously the kids pick volleyball because it's hands-on, it's fun. But then I was left sitting out, not being able to do it. And it's things like that where asking someone before you like say it to the rest of the students, because kids are going to be kids, teenagers are going to be teenagers, they're going to get excited over things, and if they don't end up getting to do it, they're just going to be like, oh, why don't we get to do that, blah, 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 blah. And it's not that, because obviously if you're in a school and you have a class and you have 1 or 2 disabled students, you have to think about the able-bodied students as well, obviously, but checking in with those children and making sure that they feel included and that they know that if something doesn't feel right to them or they want to recommend something, they have the power to do that and say, hey, can we not do this today? I'm not feeling up to it for whatever reason, without asking questions. Because I don't know about you, but I don't like justifying why I don't want to do something that day, because it could be for many reasons. Yeah.
Thank you, Xander. I'm conscious of time and I don't really want to cut off the great conversations, but we do need to wrap up. But what I'd like to do, I suppose, is to finish with reflections from Xander, Ellen, and Mac as to what's the one thing that you want families. So we've spoken a little bit in the questions and answers about educators, but what's the one thing you would like families of young children to know about including their children early in their lives? And Ellen, I'll go to you first, if that's okay.
That's fine. I think it's really important. To be able to be there to support your child with whatever they want to do and whether they want to become. even if it's not exactly lining up with what you had originally hoped for them, they might decide to become, you know, a doctor instead of an engineer or something like that, just slightly different pathways. It's important to support them and be there for them and be able to advocate for them. Yeah.
Thank you, Ellen. And Mac, can I go to you next, please? What is the one thing you want families to hear, please?
One thing that is so hard. I can think of so many. But I think one thing that I guess we haven't really talked about today, so I will pick that one, is that we recognize and we like remember all these little things that you do now, that it does have a really positive impact for us in the future, and that doing these things now in our early lives sets us off to be in a really good place for the rest of our lives. And I know that it can be hard at times, but in the end it ends up being worthwhile. Yeah.
Thanks, Mac. And Xander, I'll give you the last word. What's the one thing that you would like families of young children to hear, please?
In some instances, inclusion may be hard. You may have to put in some extra effort to adapt an activity that you originally envisioned, but you have to change it to suit your child. And sometimes people may not listen, but that shouldn't be a discouragement that inclusion's not possible. Some people are going to make it difficult, but inclusion is something that is literally everywhere. It can be implemented into everything. Just because someone is being stubborn and is like, I'm not going to change my mind because I don't want to, that's just them being bigoted. That doesn't mean inclusion's not there. Inclusion can be found anywhere, regardless of the activity, regardless of the type of family that you have. Having inclusion as something that you're always keeping in the back of your mind will help your child acknowledge that there's always a way that I can do things. Just because I may not be able to do things a certain way, that doesn't mean it's a dead end, I can't do it. Because as soon as you say you can't do that, that as little as it sounds, it hits very close to home, because it's like, oh, that's just another thing I can't do. So instead of doing that, adapting and including the child and being like, hey, what if we did it this way? That's really empowering. Yeah.
Thank you, Xander. And we might wrap up now. And I just wanted to, first and foremost, to say thank you to Xander, Ellen, and Mac for really shepherding us and guiding us through this discussion today and being the hallmarks for that discussion. So thank you very much. Thank you to Doreen and to Debbie for their involvement as well. I would just remind people that the next webinar is in June and will cover early intervention and inclusion. Can we do both? So getting into some meaty stuff. You will see Ellen, Xander and Mac across other webinars later on as well. So thank you all for joining us and for your questions in the chat. You will also note in the slides that were sent out that we have put some numbers up for more information about CYDA and any supports. So please, if anything that you have heard today has made you feel uncomfortable or has been difficult, please reach out. If you have any questions that weren't covered during today, please shoot them through to the email address that we'll have sent you a few emails, and we will put that up. We'll also have recorded this session and we'll be recording all webinars, and they will all be available on the CYDA YouTube account in a short period of time. And also we will have links to the handouts. One of the handouts includes an explanation of what Xander largely covered at the beginning around communication, image descriptions, etc. So there's lots of helpful information in there as well. So finally, thank you very much, and we'll see you all shortly.